A long time ago, after Adam and Eve, the people on earth became very wicked. They were violent, selfish, and forgot about God. This made God very sad. But there was one man who still loved and obeyed God. His name was Noah. God decided to send a great flood to wash away the evil in the world. But because Noah was faithful, God wanted to save him and his family. God told Noah to build a huge boat called an ark. It had to be very big, with rooms inside, and covered with pitch, a kind of tar, so it would not leak. Noah obeyed, even though people thought he was foolish, and people laughed at him, because it had never flooded before. While he worked, Noah also warned people about the coming flood, but no one listened. When the ark was ready, God told Noah to bring in his family, his wife, his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. God also sent 2 of every kind of animal, male and female, and 7 pairs of clean animals for sacrifices later. The animals came into the ark, and Noah carefully took care of them. Then, God shut the door of the ark. The rain began to fall. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And soon the whole earth was covered with water. Even the tallest mountains, all living things outside the ark, were destroyed. But Noah, his family, and the animals inside the ark were safe. After the rain stopped, the waters took many months to go down. The ark finally came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. To test if the land was dry, Noah first sent out a raven, then a dove. The dove came back with an olive leaf, showing that plants had started growing again. When the earth was finally dry, God told Noah and his family to come out of the ark. With all the animals, Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices to God, thanking him for saving them. God was pleased and made a promise, or covenant, with Noah. He said he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. As a sign of this promise, God placed the first rainbow in the sky. The story of Noah teaches us about faith, obedience, and God's mercy. Even when the world is full of sin, God cares for those who follow him. Daniel was known for his knowledge and wisdom. Daniel was known for being very wise and smart. When he and his friends were taken to Babylon, they had to study the language and books there for 3 years. At the end, they were found to be 10 times smarter than all the wise men and magicians in the whole kingdom. Daniel was a young boy from Judah, who was taken far away from his home when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Jerusalem. He and his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were chosen to serve in the king's palace because they were smart and handsome. But before they could serve, they had to eat the king's rich food and wine. Daniel wanted to obey God's laws, so he asked the guard to let him and his friends eat only vegetables and drink water instead. The guard was afraid they would grow weak, but Daniel trusted God. After 10 days, they looked healthier and stronger than all the others. God blessed them with wisdom and understanding, and soon, Daniel was known as one of the wisest men in Babylon. One night, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that no one could explain. Daniel prayed to God, and God showed him the meaning of the dream. Daniel told the king that God was the one who gives kings their power, and that God's kingdom would last forever. The king was amazed and made Daniel a ruler over Babylon. Daniel's friends also showed great courage when the king made a golden statue and ordered everyone to bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused. They said they would only worship the one true God. The king threw them into a fiery furnace, but God protected them, and they came out without even smelling like smoke. This made the king praise their God. Later, another king, Darius, ruled over Babylon. Some men who were jealous of Daniel tricked the king into making a law that no one could pray to any god except the king for 30 days. But Daniel prayed to God 3 times a day, just as he always did. The men caught him and told the king. King Darius was sad because he liked Daniel, but the law could not be changed. Daniel was thrown into a den of hungry lions. That night, God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. In the morning, Daniel was still alive and safe. King Darius was so happy and made a new law that everyone in his kingdom must respect Daniel's God, the living God who rescues and saves. Daniel lived many years and served under different kings. God continued to give him wisdom and even showed him visions about the future. Daniel's story teaches us about faith, courage, and trusting God no matter what happens. He obeyed God even when it was dangerous, and God always took care of him. Jonathan was David's best friend. Jonathan and David were very close friends. They cared about each other, were loyal, and both trusted God. Even though Jonathan was King Saul's son, he wasn't jealous of David. Instead, he helped and supported David, even when it was risky for him. Their friendship showed the kind of true love and kindness that Jesus has for us. Jonathan was the son of King Saul, the first king of Israel. He was a brave soldier and a faithful man who loved and trusted God. Jonathan fought many battles alongside his father, and God gave him courage and success. One time, when Israel's army was afraid of the Philistines, Jonathan and his armor-bearer secretly went to fight. With God's help, Jonathan defeated many Philistines, and the enemy became afraid. This showed that Jonathan trusted God more than the size of the enemy's army. Jonathan became famous, not just because of his bravery, but also because of his friendship with David. When David killed Goliath, Jonathan saw that David also trusted God with all his heart. From that day, Jonathan and David became best friends. Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. He gave David his royal robe, his sword, his bow, and his belt as gifts, symbols of his respect and love. Even though Jonathan was the prince and the next in line to be king, he wasn't jealous of David. Instead, he believed that David was chosen by God to be the next king, and Jonathan supported him. But Jonathan's father, King Saul, became jealous of David. He wanted to kill David many times because people praised David's victories more than his. Jonathan stood up for his friend, even though it put him in danger with his father. He warned David when Saul was planning to harm him, and even helped David hide in the fields. There's a beautiful story where Jonathan and David made a promise, a covenant of friendship before God. Jonathan said, "No matter what happens, I will always be your friend, and you will always be mine." They loved and respected each other deeply. Sadly, Jonathan's life ended in battle. He fought alongside his father Saul and his brothers against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. He died bravely that day. When David heard the news, he cried deeply. He said Jonathan's love was more wonderful than anything he had ever known, and he wrote a song of grief to honor his best friend. Jonathan is remembered as a brave warrior, a faithful son, and the best friend anyone could ever have. A friend who was loyal, kind, and unselfish. Samson was the strongest man in the Bible, and the source of his strength was his hair. So long as his hair remained unshaven, he retained his God-given strength. Samson was a man God chose before he was even born. God told his parents that Samson would be a Nazirite, which meant he had to follow special rules, like never cutting his hair, not drinking wine, and staying pure. God gave Samson amazing strength to help protect Israel from their enemies, the Philistines. With God's power, Samson did incredible things. He killed the lion with his bare hands, defeated many enemies, using only the jawbone of a donkey, and carried a huge city gate on his shoulders. But Samson sometimes made bad choices, and did not always obey God. He fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who was a Philistine, the enemy of God's people, who God didn't want Samson to get a wife from. She tricked him into telling her the secret of his strength, which was his hair. At first he didn't want to tell her, but she kept asking him, and he told her the source of his strength. She told the Philistines, and they cut his hair while he was asleep. Samson lost his strength, and his enemies captured him, blinded him, and made him work in prison. Later, Samson prayed to God for strength one last time. God answered his prayer, and Samson pushed down the pillars of a big Philistine temple, defeating many of God's enemies. Lesson from the story: God gives everyone special gifts, but we should always obey Him and use our gifts to honor Him. King Solomon was the richest and wisest king in the Bible. This is because when God told Solomon he could ask for anything, Solomon asked for wisdom, so he could be a good king and lead the people well. God was very happy that Solomon didn't ask for money or riches. So, God gave Solomon great wisdom and also blessed him with wealth and many good things. Solomon was the son of King David and Bathsheba, and he became the third king of Israel. After his father died, he was chosen by God to rule, and even though he was young, he wanted to be a good leader for God's people. When Solomon became king, God appeared to him in a dream and told him he would give him anything he asked for. Instead of asking for money, power, or long life, Solomon asked for wisdom so he could lead the people well and know right from wrong. God was pleased with his request and gave him not only wisdom, but also riches, honor, and peace, like no other king before him. One of the most famous examples of Solomon's wisdom was when two women came to him, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. Solomon said he would cut the baby in half and give each woman a piece. One woman agreed, but the real mother begged him to give the baby to the other woman, so the child would live. Solomon knew then who the true mother was, and he gave the baby back to her. Everyone was amazed at his wisdom. Solomon also built a great temple in Jerusalem, a beautiful house for God, where people came to worship. He used gold, silver, precious stones, and fine wood, making it one of the most magnificent buildings ever built. During the reign of King Solomon, Israel became very rich and powerful. Kings and queens from other nations came to hear his wisdom and see his wealth, including the Queen of Sheba, who was astonished at how great Solomon's kingdom was. But later in life, Solomon made mistakes. He married many wives from other nations who worshiped false gods, and they led him away from obeying God with all his heart. Because of this, God became displeased and said that after Solomon's death, the kingdom would be divided. Even with his mistakes, Solomon is remembered as the wisest man who ever lived, and he wrote many of the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs in the Bible, teaching about wisdom, life, and love for God. Abraham was a friend of God. Abraham was called a friend of God because he trusted God with all his heart and always obeyed him. He even showed his faith by being willing to give up his son Isaac if God asked. Because Abraham trusted and obeyed, God shared his plans with him and had a close friendship with him. Abraham was a man who loved and obeyed God. At first, his name was Abram, and he lived in a place called Ur with his family. One day, God told Abraham to leave his home and go to a new land that God would show him. God made Abraham a special promise, called a covenant. He promised to bless him, give him many descendants, children, grandchildren, and so on, and make him the father of many nations. Even though Abraham and his wife Sarah were very old and had no children, Abraham trusted God's promise. One night, God told Abraham to look up at the stars in the sky. God said that his descendants would be as many as the stars, and Abraham believed him. Years later, when Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah was 90 years old. God did a miracle. Sarah gave birth to a son named Isaac. This showed that nothing is too hard for God. Abraham's faith was tested. When God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham trusted God completely and was ready to obey. But God stopped him and provided a ram to sacrifice instead. This showed Abraham's deep faith and obedience. Abraham is remembered as the father of faith because he believed and followed God, no matter what, and God kept all his promises to him. David was a man after God's heart. David was called a man after God's own heart because he truly loved God. Even though David sometimes made mistakes, he was humble and always said sorry when he did wrong. He wanted to make God happy and tried his best to follow God's ways. David was a young shepherd boy from Bethlehem, the youngest of 8 brothers. He spent his days caring for his father's sheep, playing the harp, and singing songs to God. God saw David's heart, full of love, courage, and faith, and chose him to be the future king of Israel. The prophet Samuel anointed David with oil, showing that God had chosen him. One of the most famous moments in David's life happened when the Israelites were at war with the Philistines. The Philistines had a giant warrior named Goliath, who scared everyone, but David trusted God, picked up 5 smooth stones, and with just 1 stone and his sling, he defeated Goliath. This victory made David very popular. David became a brave warrior and served King Saul. Sadly, Saul grew jealous of David and tried to harm him, but David never tried to hurt Saul because he respected him as the king God had chosen. Eventually, Saul died in battle, and David became king over all Israel. As king, David loved to worship God. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and danced before the Lord with joy. He wrote many of the Psalms we read in the Bible today. However, David wasn't perfect. He made mistakes and sinned. But when he realized his wrong, he always prayed for forgiveness and turned back to God. Because of his deep love for God, David was called a man after God's own heart. David ruled Israel for many years, bringing peace and victory to the nation. God promised David that his family line would last forever, and from David's family came Jesus, the Savior of the world. Saul was the very first king of Israel. Before him, the Israelites had no king. They were led by judges and prophets. But the people wanted to be like other nations that had kings. Even though God wanted to be their king, he allowed Samuel the prophet to anoint Saul as their leader. Saul was tall and handsome, standing out among all the men of Israel. At first, he was humble and did not think he was worthy of being king. When Samuel anointed him with oil, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he began to lead the people with courage. Saul won many battles against Israel's enemies, especially the Philistines. The people were happy and proud of him. But as time went on, Saul began to disobey God's instructions. In one battle, he offered a sacrifice that only the prophet Samuel was supposed to offer. Later, God commanded him to completely destroy the Amalekites, who were God's enemies. But Saul spared their king and the best animals. When prophet Samuel confronted him, Saul made excuses, instead of fully admitting his sin. Because of this, Samuel told Saul that God had rejected him as king, and that another man, chosen by God, would take his place. From then on, Saul's heart became troubled. He grew jealous and afraid when David, a young shepherd, killed Goliath and became popular among the people. Instead of being glad that God was helping Israel, Saul became angry and tried many times to kill David. In his later years, Saul was filled with fear and despair. Before one great battle with the Philistines, he even went to a medium to call up the spirit of the prophet Samuel. who had already died. Samuel told him that, because of his disobedience, he and his sons would die in battle. Sadly, Samuel's words came true. Saul's army was defeated, and instead of being captured by his enemies, Saul fell on his own sword. His reign ended in tragedy, and David, the young man chosen by God, became the next king. Moses was the most humble and peaceful man on earth.
This wasn't because he was weak or afraid. It was because he always asked God for help,
showed patience and kindness,
and obeyed God's way, even when people were mean to him or treated him unfairly.
Moses was a man God chose to save his people,
the Israelites, from slavery in Egypt. When Moses was a baby,
the king of Egypt wanted to hurt all Hebrew baby boys,
so his mother hid him in a basket on the river.
The king's daughter found him and raised him in the palace.
When Moses grew up,
God spoke to him through a burning bush and told him to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go free.
Pharaoh refused, so God sent 10 plagues to Egypt. Finally, Pharaoh let them go. Moses led the Israelites through the Red Sea,
which God miraculously parted.
God gave Moses the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai to teach the people how to live.
Moses trusted God and led his people for many years,
but he didn't enter the promised land. Still, he is remembered as one of God's greatest leaders.
Jonah disobeyed God when he tried to run away, instead of going to preach in Nineveh. Because of this, a big storm came, and Jonah was thrown into the sea, where a huge fish swallowed him. While inside the fish, Jonah prayed and said sorry. After that, he obeyed God and went to Nineveh like God wanted. Jonah was a prophet of God. One day, God told Jonah to go to a great city called Nineveh. The people there were very wicked, and God wanted Jonah to tell them to stop doing evil things and turn back to him. But Jonah did not want to go. He didn't like the people of Nineveh, and didn't think they deserved God's forgiveness. So, instead of obeying, Jonah ran away. He went down to a port, and got on a ship that was going far in the opposite direction. While Jonah was on the sea, God sent a powerful storm. The wind blew hard, and huge waves crashed against the ship. The sailors were terrified, and began throwing their cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. They prayed to their gods, but nothing worked. Jonah was fast asleep inside the ship. The sailor went to wake him up and asked him to pray to his God. They tried hard to calm the storm, but they could not. Finally, Jonah admitted that the storm was his fault, because he was running away from the true God. He told them, "Throw me into the sea, and the storm will stop." The sailors didn't want to, but the storm grew worse. So they finally threw Jonah into the water. Right away, the sea became calm, but Jonah didn't drown. God had prepared a huge fish, sometimes called a whale, to swallow him. Jonah stayed inside the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. While he was there, Jonah prayed to God, asking for forgiveness, and thanking God for saving his life. Then, God commanded the fish to spit Jonah out onto dry land. Jonah was safe. This time, Jonah obeyed God. He went to Nineveh and preached to the people, saying, "In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed if you don't turn from your evil ways." To Jonah's surprise, the people listened. From the king to the poorest person, they repented, prayed, and stopped doing wrong. God saw this and forgave them. He decided not to destroy the city. Jonah, however, was not happy. He was angry that God showed mercy to Nineveh. He sat outside the city and pouted. God made a plant grow to give him shade, but then sent a worm to eat the plant. Jonah got even angrier. Then God spoke to Jonah and taught him a lesson. "You care about this plant, but shouldn't I care about the thousands of people and animals in Nineveh?" Jonah learned that God's love and mercy are for everyone, not just for some. The story of Jonah teaches us that we cannot run away from God, and it shows us how merciful God is. He forgives those who turn back to Him.